Hey everyone, so last week we started talking about how to assemble an AR-15 pistol in a pistol caliber, in this case 9mm. And last week we talked about how to assemble the lower receiver and the buffer system. This week we're going to talk about how to assemble the upper receiver. So get ready, we're going to finish this thing out. It's time to get real hazardous. So if you missed last week is how to install the lower receiver, make sure to go check that out. But today we're looking at how to assemble the upper. And the upper is going to be a little bit different, not nearly as many parts involved, but we still got to get it done. So first thing we'll do, we'll go ahead and put the upper receiver into the vise. So we will install those first. Now, the bolt carrier, if you buy a 1/4 circle 10 bolt carrier, it doesn't have the notches that a forward assist needs to function. So a forward assist is actually pretty much useless for a 1/4 circle 10 build, but we don't want empty holes that are going to get filled with dirt and stuff, so we're going to go ahead and install the forward assist anyway. You'll notice the forward assist assembly has a pointy end to it, and the pointy end has a little flex to it. The pointy end of the forward assist should flex away from the gun when it's inside. So line that up, go ahead and put the spring over it and push it in. If you have a really small roll pin, you can slide it through one side of the little hole at the top to keep it all lined up. And we'll go back to roll pins. Tap that roll pin in, again, get it good and flush. As you're doing it, constantly check and make sure that the forward assist is not sitting so far out that it's not actually installed. With the forward assist in place, we're going to go ahead and install the ejection port cover next. Now obviously you have the big plate that covers the ejection port, you have the rod, which is all that's going to sit on, you have a little C-clip that's going to hold this thing in place, and you have a spring. Go ahead and take the rod of your ejection port cover, and you'll notice on one end there's a small little groove. That C-clip clips on that groove, and that's going to sit on the front of your upper receiver to keep the whole thing from sliding out. So you might need a pair of pliers to clip that pin in place, that little C-clip looking thing. And from there, we can go ahead and start threading that rod on the upper receiver. So taking the rod, you're gonna go ahead and just barely put it in the slot, because then you really need to set the ejection port cover in place. Now the way the ejection port cover should sit is the flat side, the side that doesn't have that bump on it, should be facing out, away from this receiver. But there's a gap in the ejection port cover where the rod will come across where the spring needs to sit. Now you'll notice the spring for the ejection port cover has two ends, one's kind of short, one's a little bit longer. The short end of the spring should be sitting on the mouth of the ejection port. And the other end of the spring, you're going to turn clockwise to put it under tension, and it will sit on the ejection port cover. And so turning that spring under tension, holding it in place, being very careful to keep the ejection port lined up and the rod, slide the rod through the spring and then through the ejection port cover all the way to the other side. It's a little easier to say than to do, but once it's all in place, there should be spring pressure on the ejection port so that when you go to flip it up, the spring wants to pull it back down. Once that's in place, we'll move on to installing the barrel. You'll notice on the front of the upper receiver, there's a hole where the barrel would go. Well, that's where the barrel is going to go. And just like in the last video we put grease on our buffer tube, we're going to grease the inner and outer rings of the upper receiver, and we're going to grease the barrel. And you'll notice on the barrel there's a little bump at the base of it that sits up, and you'll also notice there's a notch missing out of the top of the upper receiver. Those correspond so that you know which direction your barrel should sit in the upper receiver. And so with that greased up, go ahead and slide the barrel into the upper receiver. And now this thing's starting to look a little bit more like a gun. Now the thing that holds the barrel in place is actually our handguard, or in particular, the barrel nut, which is going to attach to our handguard. If you've ever assembled an AR-15 upper receiver before, you know that usually when we start putting on the barrel and the handguard, we also have to deal with the gas block. And that all kind of factors into how do you align the different parts. Well, for this, we don't have to put on a gas block because we're using a pistol caliber. But when we go to install the handguard, we still want to keep it all properly aligned because the barrel nut and the handguard require specific alignment. In this particular case, we are going to be using a Sequence Precision MSCR V2 rail system. And so taking the barrel nut from that, we're going to go ahead and install it. If you look at the MSCR V2 rail system, you'll notice the barrel nut has 4 holes every 90 degrees, or at 12, 3, 6, and 9 o'clock. The idea is one of those 4 holes should be aligned properly with the gas block. So to go ahead and start doing that, we're going to go ahead and put the barrel nut on. Likewise, I grease the inside of the barrel nut. We'll thread it on, see if it's close. Sequence precision sentence spacers to go inside the barrel nut as well to kind of help you get more closer to where you need to be. Based off recommendations of friends and other gunsmiths and YouTube people, we're going to do what's called timing the threads, which means when we go to install the barrel nut, we will tighten it down with the torque wrench twice, and after those 2 times we'll loosen it each time. Then the 3rd time we will tighten it down and leave it there. So this first time as I put the barrel nut on, it's not going to be perfectly aligned. That's okay. As I'm getting it aligned, I'm also going to go ahead and take my torque wrench, set the torque wrench to 35 foot-pounds, and torque it down until I hear the click. And then I'm going to unscrew it. So that would be our first sequence in the timing process. I've added spacers into the barrel nut and I will thread it down, tighten it again. I think that's where it needs to be, but we're going to go ahead and loosen the barrel nut one more time and then take it on again. Tighten it down to 35 foot-pounds. It's close, but it's not quite there, so I'm going to dial up the torque wrench by a few more pounds to about 40 foot-pounds and tighten it down. With the barrel nut in place, we can go ahead and add the handguard. So taking the MSCR V2 handguard, I'm going to go ahead and slide it into place. It's a little bit snug. I'm going to take the soft end of my gunsmith hammer and give it a few taps to make sure it is fully seated. And then I saw this trick on YouTube, so I'm going to use it likewise. It makes sense to me. Scientists can tell me otherwise if this doesn't actually work. But I'm going to take my upper receiver now out of the vise and set it upside down on my workbench. My workbench is level, so in theory my upper receiver should be level. And with it all set upside down on my workbench, I'm going to take the screws that attach the handguard to the barrel nut and put the screws in. I'm going to start off just putting each one of them in, and I'll go back later and tighten them down. With the handguard in place, there's really not much left. We just have to install the charging handle and the bolt carrier, and this thing will be good to go. And so taking that charging handle, we'll go ahead and set that in place. Then taking the bolt carrier, we will slide that in with that little notch on the bolt carrier going up under the charging handle. We'll push all those forward, and our upper receiver at this point is good to go. We can attach it to our lower receiver, and we have a gun that if we loaded it, it would shoot. Now you'll notice there's a few more accessories we've added onto this thing. That's the nice thing about ARs. They are really easy to accessorize to your personal preference. We added an angled foregrip, some backup sights, red dot, and if you notice, most barrels, and this barrel as well, was threaded so that you can put a muzzle device on it like a flash hider or a muzzle brake or maybe a suppressor if you're so inclined. We chose to use the MSCR V2 rail with hopes that maybe one day we could put a suppressor on it if the government will stop taxing us for these kind of things. Speaking of taxes, have you heard taxation is theft? Well, if you haven't, there you go. And if you have and you want to remove some of that theft, if you want to cut some taxes some way, then you want to put a suppressor on your guns one day, then check out what is called the Hearing Protection Act. It is a bill going through Congress right now which seeks to take suppressors off the list of Class 3 items so that you would not have to pay a $200 tax stamp to buy one. Sounds good, saves some money, and anytime we can get less taxes, the better. So make sure to check that out. That's something that I have signed up for as well, and I encourage anyone that thinks they want to have a suppressor or just thinks that people should have the right to put a suppressor on their guns. So make sure to check that. That's the Hearing Protection Act. Public service announcement over. Our AR-15 pistol is now complete, so now we can go take it out to the range. So our quarter circle 10 AR pistol caliber pistol, it's kind of a mouthful, but it's now done. If you missed last week's video where we talked about how to assemble the lower receiver, make sure to check that out. We will include a link at the end of this video. If you liked the video, by all means give us a like. If you have a question or a comment, leave us one in the comment section of this video. Feel free to share the video with your friends, like us on Facebook, subscribe to us on YouTube, check us out at realhazardous.com. And if you enjoyed this video and want to see more videos like it, let us know, and we will try and do that as the weeks go on. In the meantime, summer's approaching, fishing videos, all sorts of that stuff coming up. Get ready, we're gonna have a good time. In the meantime, I think I have a trip to the range I need to do. So I'll see you guys next time. Have fun, be safe, live hazardously.